Welcome back. So as you can see, my installation has completed successfully. You'll be prompted to reboot or restart your machine once the installation is finished. There's a couple of windows that pop up indicating that they're doing some, the operating system's doing some PostScript installations, and you just watch that go through, and then you can just hit the reboot button, and it'll go through a process of restarting, and you'll be presented with a screen similar to this. Well, pretty much exactly the same as this. It'll talk about commercial support, administrator guide, talk about the openfiler is licensed under the terms of the GUN GPL version 2, and then it'll say welcome to openfiler. And this is the important part, because in order to administer this we're going to use the web interface, and so we need to know what the IP address is. Notice that we're using HTTPS, and so it's a secure SSL connection, and you'll need to put that IP address into a web browser as is. So let's do that now. Got a web browser open, HTTPS 192.168.100.41, and the port number is important, but it's only listening on that port number. We understand the risks, so we're happy with that, and we're going to add an exception. Confirm the exception in my browser, and so now I'm prompted with a logon. Openfiler and password, not password1, and then we have the interface. So now we can check out our operating system. Over here is represented here on the browser, and so we can see things like our network usage. Because it's a NAS, it's actually operating on a network, and so this is important information. We want to know how much information's been received and sent, if there's been any errors or dropped packets. We want to know how much time it's been up. We want to know how much memory's being used, and we want to know information about the mounted drives. So at the moment my first drive is the only one that's mounted, and we're going to go through now and create those other drives on the system. So to do that we need to use the tabs across the top of the browser, and we're going to go into volumes. And some of these terms, some of these words you're going to remember from our previous classes, because this is what we did in LVM. However, now we're going to add another function of using RAID, and we're going to set it up using this interface, and you'll recognize things like physical volumes, volume groups, and logical volumes, although I don't think it uses the term logical volumes in openfiler. So under volumes we want to create new physical volumes. Now we don't have any physical volumes, and so we need to modify these volumes here, these hard drives, these devices that we have, and we need to make them into a physical volume that can be addressed with a volume group, and then logical volumes. As I'm going through this process, you'll notice from time to time that my screen will change over here, and that's because it's actually just showing you what it's doing on the server itself. As we make the changes here, you'll see those changes taking place in the console. Just having a look here before we start, we've got our partitions, and we have 3 partitions already created, and you'll see those partitions listed here. We spoke about those when we were doing the install, and you'll see that we've got no partitions on these other 3 drives. So I'm just going to go into the second drive and show you what that looks like. We've got 3 options down here. We can select it as an extended partition. In other words, it will become an extended partition at a basic level, or we can go for a physical volume, which is your LVM terminology that we learnt about, or as we spoke about in class also, you can join a RAID array. So these would be the 2 options that I'd be interested in, and we've gone through creating physical volumes for LVMs, so I'm going to suggest that we do the RAID array membership for each of those hard drives. So we're going to do that now, and we'll create. And now we have a Linux RAID array member on SDB, which has now become SDB1 because it's got the partition set up. It's a primary type partition, it's 20 gig, and it talks about the block sizes and the start and ending cylinder. So we can delete that from here if we want to, and we need to go through that process for all 3 hard drives. So I'm just going to quickly do that now. Go back into block devices, pick up on our second hard drive that's going to be a part of that array. And all done. So now if I go back into block devices, you'll see that I've got 1 partition on each of those 3 hard drives. Okay, now normally what we do then is just add a volume, but we need to go one step further. We need to go down to our software RAID, and we need to create the array. So here we've got the option of creating a RAID 0, RAID 1, 5, 6 or 10. 10 is a combination of 1 and 0, so joining these 2 together, and 5 is parity, that's what we want, so minimum of 3 hard drives to do this. We can select the chunk size for the information that's laid across each of the hard drives, so it's stripped across, and so we're just going to go with the default of 64K. Select the hard drives that you want to be a part of this array. We could select, if we had more than 3, we could say, well, we want 1 to be a spare, and that way it's a part of the array, it's sitting in the hard drive, sitting in the server, and then if something goes wrong we can swap it over, or it swaps over automatically. So let's create the array. And that's done. You'll see that it's not started at the moment, and it's also in the clean and degraded state, so it's recognised that the hard drives are good, but nothing's happened yet, so it's going to start up. This is going to take about half an hour, 45 minutes, maybe a bit longer, and it will make sure that those 3 hard drives are operating as one volume. We can use it in between, but it will be just a little bit slower, and we can watch that progress by coming back to the software RAID, having a look at the progress that's taken place. Once that has finished, it will go to a green state, and it will talk about being clean and synchronized in those 2 areas. So you can come back here anytime and have a look at that. Alright, so let's go to adding a volume now. Alright, so there is no volume group at the moment. We've done the physical volumes, in the sense that we've created the RAID array, and so it will see them as a physical volume now. But we do need to create a volume group before we can put logical volumes in, and so we're going to call this VG pool. That's the name of our volume group, and we're going to select what physical volumes, there they are there, we want, and there is only one, and that is the MD0. Now the MD0 didn't exist before we created the array, and you'll also notice that my hard drives were 20 gig each, 60 gig in total, but the total amount of the volume is only 40 gig, and that makes sense with what we've talked about with RAID, because it takes 1/3 of the hard drive space, total hard drive space, and it's reserved for the parity check blocks and making sure that our data remains if we lose one of those hard drives. So that's all fine, and we're going to create that volume group. And we're done. Last thing we need to do is create logical volumes. So I'm going to add a volume again. This time I don't need to add the volume group because it's created and it recognises that. Now I could split this up and use this as more than one volume group, more than one logical volume, or I can use the whole amount of space, and we can do that through the sliding scale down here. For this exercise, I'm just going to use the whole lot, and you'll see that I've actually selected, or I'm using the volume group pool, the VG pool. If I had more than one volume group, I could select and change that from this point here. So we need to give it a name. I'm just going to call it student data. And student data. I'm going to use the whole lot. And the file system type, as you'll remember from last week's lesson and the week before, that we need to have a file system in order to put files onto the partition, and we need to choose one of these three. We only have three options at this point. XFS is good for streaming information across the network, so if you're using things like videos and music, you may want to use that file system. We're going to choose ext3, and iSCSI is used as an external hard drive basically. So if you wanted to set up remote hard drives on a server and you wanted to access them from a dumb terminal that didn't have a hard drive or didn't have a lot of hard drive space, then you could set up iSCSI, and iSCSI would act as an internal hard drive to that remote machine. So it's quite cool and very, very fast. So we don't need any of that, so we're just going to go for ext3, and let's create that. That's going to take a little bit of time. Alright, so that's done now, and we can see that we've got a volume group, VG pool. We've got a volume name or a logical volume called student data, and it lists the various aspects of that logical volume. So we're ready to go. We've got everything we need in order to start sharing. So before we do start sharing though, we need to go back into System, and we need to create a network access configuration. So in order to do this, we're going to set up an IP range that is accessible, that we can set up to say, well, we're going to allow access to this IP address system. So for me, at the moment, I'm using 192.168.100, but you in the classroom will be using 172.16, possibly 4, because we're usually in HG03. .0, because it's a network address. The subnet mask, we're just using a standard Class C subnet mask, and so we can pick up on that. And the access type is share, so we want to be able to share information on that particular network range. So we'll just create that, and it's done. You can see that it's created down there. Then we need to go into shares, and you'll see that there is my volume group pool, and there is my logical volume. Now under logical volume, we need to create a structure that we can share out. So I'm just going to type in the folder name being data, create the subfolder, and at this point here, by clicking on it, I can start to share information. So I can make it a share, I can make it a home share. We're just going to make that a share. And that's done. So we're ready to share. We can go for public access, or we can go for controlled access with a control list, usernames, passwords. We're just going to go for public access for ease and convenience. Once I clicked on update on public access, it's given me my host access configuration, and it's saying that HG03 network 192.168.100.0 has no access. If you have a look at this, there's my Windows configuration, so SMB or Samba. There's my Linux NFS, and I can share through a web interface or FTP, and then I've got rsync, which is a copying utility that we spoke about. You're using rsync with your backups, and so we can also set that up. 3 options under public access. We can go for no sharing, read only, or write. So obviously under controlled access we have more control, but for us we just need to go for the basics at the moment. So I'm just going to go for read, write access on my Windows share, and read, write access on FTP. Update, and we should be done. Let's minimize that. Go back into my Windows machine, start, run, type in the IP address or the host name of your machine, and we get nothing. Why do we get nothing? Because I forgot to do one critical aspect. So let me just jump back into that. And I did forget to come into the services. So we need to go to the services tab, and we need to enable the services that we want to run on this particular openfiler server. And so I've enabled my Windows sharing, Samba, and FTP enabled. FTP at another time. So my Windows share or my Samba's been enabled, and so now when I click on, let me do that again, start, run 192.168.141, I'm now presented with a share. Nothing in it at the moment. A bit laggy. Let's chuck something into it. Let's chuck something into so I've got a folder, I've got a file, I've got some content in the file. So let's come over